Welcome in to Flag for Discussion, episode 9 for Monday, June 9th. My name is Farbod Markazi. He's Jace Hatfield, as always. Thanks for tuning in. Before we dive in, hit up our socials. We're on Twitter at F4Discussion, YouTube at Flag for Discussion, TikTok, Flag the number 4 Discussion. We're also everywhere you get your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, all the goods. Where I only mention those two because that's where I listen to podcasts, but we're everywhere else you get your podcast. So feel free to check us out there. Subscribe, like, hit the bell. I don't know all the words, Jace. But we got a bit of a massive show lined up for everyone. And I know we've been saying that week after week. But the biggest story in college football, at least in the last 20 years, maybe 30 years, if not ever, just dropped. So we're going to get into the House settlement that just passed, talk about what it means for schools, what it means for your school, no matter how big of a program your school might be, how small, talking about roster caps, salary caps, roster caps, back pay, all the legal drama and jargon that I'm not smart enough to know, but we are now going to be talking about on this podcast.
Give it our best shot.
Exactly. That's as long as we had fun, who cares? And then
Yep.
we're going to talk about if time permits, we're going to bring up the devastating news out in Eugene with Evan Stewart and his injury, and then finish it up with round 3 of the program report. So, Jace, before we dive into everything, I got to talk about. I got to intro what the House settlement essentially is. So,
Yep.
long story short, for those who didn't know, who haven't been paying attention or followed along through the years, NIL essentially has had no governing body over the last 3-4 years since it's been a thing in college football. The NCAA and college football has been basically awaiting the results and the ruling of the House settlement to try to add some sort of governing body, even if it's not the NCAA doing their job. It's what the House settlement essentially does for teams is every school will now have a $20-ish million salary cap for their entire athletic department. They can now officially pay players through their actual athletic department, almost through like a pro model, rather than requiring third parties,
Boosters, things like that.
and collectives to make those deals for them. Long story short, every school will have their own ability to decide who gets paid, what sport they dedicate what money to. So let's say you're a big-time Power 4, Power 5 program in football, you're probably going to dedicate a lot more of that money to football. What you're going to, if you're maybe, let's say you're a basketball school, you're Duke. I don't know this for sure, but I would assume Duke is going to dedicate a lot more money comparatively to basketball. The other aspect of this is there's going to be a bit of a regulating arm on NIL deals. Any deal over $600 for athletes will now have to be reviewed and looked over by this new college sports commission they're adding as their own governing body, led by Brian Sheely, if I'm reading that right. Their job is to monitor revenue sharing violations. Their job is to review NIL deals with boosters and roster enforcement and compliance. So essentially, what they're there to do what the NCAA hasn't been able to do the last couple of years, and actually monitor the NIL deals, make sure not as much shady crap is going on. So any deal over $600 or over will be reviewed by these guys. There's a lot to get into. The other aspect of it is there's going to be a roster cap for every program in the country. So now essentially walk-ons are probably done for. So all of that said, that was a lot of word garbage that I just spewed out, but I thought it was necessary. Jace, give me your initial reaction. Let's talk.
Yeah, when this news broke yesterday, I was happy to see something go down. Just it's better than no rules or legislation about NIL. So I thought this was a good first step. I think a salary cap was a good first step as well. I think like the high bidding NIL was just not great for the sport. I think it is also not great for the athletes as much. Yeah, the paycheck's nice, but I think athletes probably weren't making decisions best for themselves. Just, I mean, money's hard, especially when we've talked about the villains with camps and agents and stuff. I think that NIL structure was poor for that. But I do think this is a step in the right direction. I like that we've acknowledged and are addressing the issue. We'll see how much this commission, I think they're calling it, actually works and what they do. Like, I wonder if they'll like is tampering tampering has been rampant. I mean, every coach is being like, "Oh yeah, everyone's tampering," and
In every
nothing's come
sport
out of
too.
that. So yes, but I heard like baseball, someone in like the super regionals was
Yeah.
talking about that.
Do you
Um,
do you think it's funny how every good thing that comes in college football these days, you and I, our first reaction is, I hope they're going to do what they
yeah,
say they are, instead of actually like believing what the legal jargon's supposed to be.
yeah, it is always I hope, and it'd be interesting to go back through all the I hopes and see how many panned out which way. Maybe we'll have to track that in an Excel sheet here or something. But so I hope this proves to be better. My fear is that this commission is just going to be a, hey, my buddy who's the athletic director at Texas, yeah, I'm not gonna, that's fine, whatever. Oh, but I know I hate Texas A&M, and they just did something maybe shady. Let me jump on their back. So I hope that it doesn't become like a favor kind of committee. I hope that this stays a neutral. I believe it's an offshoot of Deloitte, like the
It
consulting
is.
accounting
It
firm.
is. Yeah.
So hopefully that helps, like having a public company that's hands off, control this. And then my other big thought with this was what's going to happen to non-revenue generating sports. Yeah, for those of you who aren't familiar with the revenue and the way that athletic departments typically run, almost every athletic department makes money, like profits off of football. Some schools, especially schools that are very nichely good, like Duke basketball, produces a lot of money, but Oklahoma basketball is probably net even, maybe even a little in the red. Some schools like UConn women's basketball, that's producing money. Albeit not a whole lot of profit, but it is producing money. But your rowing team probably is not producing money. So with only 20.5 million to spend in this cap, these big programs, these big schools are probably going to focus on, I would imagine, football, men's basketball, maybe women's basketball if they're competitive there. And then if they're competitive in either baseball or softball, I would imagine funds going to those. But every other program outside of that, I think these big schools are going to either cut them just for the sake of, hey, we can't afford to own these school or these programs anymore, fund them, or they're just going to say we're going to put no money into them. We're willing to let them suck, but if you're a fan of the school and you're good at rowing, feel free to come to UConn. You can do
Yeah.
it for free with shit gear. But
Yeah.
so I think it kills those other,
I
those non-revenue sports.
You're absolutely on the right track there. I think in general, what other sports, non-revenue sharing sports, revenue generating sports have been afraid of the last 2 or 3 years, since we had assumed this settlement was going to come through at some point, was, am I going to be able to play my sport still? Or am I going to be able to coach my sport still? And granted, I have to mention this. There's a lot of people act like this is controversial. The difference between a football coach and a lacrosse coach is millions and millions of people will go and watch their football games. So their salaries are reflected by the amount of people and they entertain by their sport. So it's not that lacrosse or rowing or pick your favorite non-revenue generating sport is not important. They're absolutely important
Mhm.
and great sports. It's just there's a reason football will get the brunt of the uh, the cap from most schools. To your point, and just to spell it out, I mentioned this when before we started recording, but I read somewhere, and mind you, these aren't factual, these aren't dictated by the Oregon Athletic Department. But I read from one of the beat writers that as of right now, they are planning on a $15 million going to the football team for their payroll. Then about five ish going to the men's basketball team. The rest of it going to the women's basketball team, about 500 grand to a million. And then after that, it's supposed to be divvied up in uh, scholarship counts, scholarship totals for all the other sports. So I'm not smart enough to discuss all of that, but what I can tell you is there's going to be a lot of upheaval in athletic departments if there hasn't been already. In general,
Yeah.
there in general, if it's a sad day for non-football and especially non-football sports because you really understand where you fall on the totem pole of athletics within your athletic department based on how your athletic department decides to treat everything. The other aspect of what you're saying that I think is really interesting is we probably have seen if you're a school that recently upgraded your facilities or already have plans and construction is underway, congratulations. Probably not going to happen for a while.
Yeah. Schools
Where
aren't gonna be able to afford that anymore.
no, it like Jay said, all schools football programs essentially fund the rest of the athletic department, and that's not just clothes and gear for the soccer teams. It's salaries for the assistant AD, for the associate AD, for all the people who are within the athletic department. There's a reason like Penn State is going to play Villanova football week 1 this year. It's because Penn State's going to pay Villanova probably $1 to $3 million to for the win, essentially for the easy first game, non-conference, and Villanova can then fund their athletic department through that. So every school has it. It's just on different levels.
Yeah.
It if you're talking about the negatives of it, if you look at the NFL, there's a reason a lot of kids who go from Division One Power Five programs and get drafted to the NFL, they're like, man, LSU's facilities are so much better than the Chiefs, or Oregon's facilities are so much better than the Lions, or like you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
not that NFL teams don't have good facilities, but those are run as essentially a business, and those owners don't want to dedicate extra money for upgrading the weight room or the facility if it's already working the way it is. So, long story short, facilities upgrades, some revenue sharing sports, some extra staffers on both the coaching side and just the athletic department side. Those people are probably going to cease to exist in the coming years, just so athletic departments can figure out how to. I sorry, Jace. I've been rambling a bunch, but
No, you're good.
just think about the aspect. Like we'll get into the positives of this because there's a good amount, but the negative of it is if you're at home and whatever proportion to your net worth $20 million is. So let's say you are $100 million making Power Five college football program, and they ask you to add $20 million to your budget. So whatever proportion that is to your life, how do you just do that in a year?
Yeah.
It unfortunately comes with a bunch of cuts, and that means
Yep.
sports, that means coaches, that means staffers that have been with your department for decades. Unfortunately, there's a good amount of cuts and changes here, but that's why we keep saying this is one of the biggest moves in college football history, just because this is going to, without a doubt, change everything we know about how college football is operated. Not on the
Yeah.
field, but operated.
Yeah, you can sum up all of the negatives in it forces athletic departments to act like a real true business. It was always a thing that athletic departments had to act like a business. That's how the financials work there. But now it's like you said, like it comes down to the real world. Like, hey, we need to make cuts. We need to find this money in our budget? Whose unimportant employees can we cut? Who are the which teams generate the least amount of revenue but soak up the most money? Can we cut those? Rosters, right? I think they're going to trim rosters to the absolute minimum, especially for smaller sports. Like, they don't want, if like right now, I think for men's basketball, you have to have 11. A lot of teams will carry 15 or 16 just with some walk-ons, and maybe you had a really good recruiting cycle, so you brought on a couple extra good players. They're probably a team, you're going to see basketball teams at 11 kids on the dot. And I don't think you're going to see those extra 4 or 5. There's no point in paying the extra money for walk-ons to have jerseys and travel and their, dining and all that kind of stuff. There's no reason to pay that extra money from their standpoint. Obviously, when you're looking at a balance sheet versus like thinking about the situation at hand. But all of these negatives you can kind of wrap up into acting like a business. Now, I know that this whole time we've been going down this route. Everything's becoming more of a business, which is for better or for worse. There's pros and cons to that. I think this is better, though. This is a step in the right direction because we were in an unregulated business situation before this, where this whole NIL transfer portal situation created what felt like a real world market without any control. We weren't treating the players and athletes like employees. They didn't have employee rights and employee like governing bodies,
They were
but they were treated
amateurs,
that way.
according to the
Yeah, they
NCAA.
were amateurs, but they were amateurs that they didn't have any control or rule over. Like they didn't have any bargaining power. Also, this doesn't necessarily give them bargaining power or put them in a spot to sit at a table, but it's a step in the direction of okay, now we're starting to treat these kids more like employees. There's a salary cap. There's going to be budgets. There's going to be a little bit more finite numbers going in. Long are the days where you can promise 30 kids $2 million a year. That's just not going to, kids can do the math now. So this helps. That we'll get into. Maybe we should dive into the pros here. But if you're just looking at the cons of the whole, but it's just this has turned into a real life business market. So now these athletic departments have to make those what end up being not shitty in the sense that they were wrong decisions, but shitty in the way that it treats people. The layoffs, the cuts, the revenue cuts, just all that kind of stuff. It's going to be a tough, I think, year or two while they iron this thing out. But
Right.
I hope it's better in the long run for the pros. That let's jump into one. Farbo, give me a pro you've thought about since this has come out.
Real quick, I've said 20.5 million. It's 22% of your total athletic department revenue for year one. So for your
Okay.
$100 million athletic departments like Texas, Ohio State, Georgia, I assume, Oregon, those schools will have the full 20 to play with. It depends on if they even want to do that. So let's say some athletic departments say, man, we can't budget 20, but we can budget 14. Then they're going to be at a disadvantage. But you have up to that 22% or 20.5 about to share with your student athletes. When we're talking about the pros, I think the first thing, and this is a more broad look at it, the first thing we looked at when you and I were in college and we talked about NIL with our former boss, and without divulging too much with everything, but I remember there was some trepidation from everyone around the country, and someone close to us said, I used to I was there when the NFL created free agency, and I was worried about that. But it's worked out great. So when NIL became a thing, I'm afraid right now, but I'm sure it'll work out great. Look, you and I were there. We had these conversations, and we had a good amount of conversations early on about like how great would NIL be, and how great would it be if these athletes actually got compensated for the work they do for the university and for the programs. So the positives of this sets up the framework for it to happen. This sets up the framework for your programs your players and student athletes to truly become a benefit revenue-wise from what you bring to the university. And the university is directly paying you in reflection of that. The counterpoint to that is the fact that some people are arguing a lot of the bigger universities are just going to be even more dangerous NIL wise, because now the boost. This isn't including as much of the boosters. This is the actual athletic department revenue. So now the boosters themselves will still be able to add on top of that NIL wise, and make it even harder for the middle of the pack teams to kind of catch up to the big boys in college football. But my biggest pro, just start off the bat, is the fact that this gets us closer to the NIL. I think everyone wanted.
Mhm.
It's a little murky. Like if you and I are doing this podcast in 2050, and we will be, but if you are, and we're looking at the last 40 years of college football at that point, from the time we were in college to 2050, we're gonna be like, what the hell was 2020 to 2025? It was just a time of transition, and it's probably gonna go through 2028 or 2029 transition. But
Yeah.
because this is federal intervention, this is an actual settlement that enforces the change and enforces a governing body. You can almost feel things calming down. Feel the fact that Kenny Dillingham was on a show last week, and he was asked, "What would you change about college football?" And he said, "Change all the changing." Like the fact that the coaches, players, programs don't have the ability to even catch up or adapt to the changes, because when they adapt, another thing changes. So at least this
Hmm.
is settling that down a little bit.
Yeah.
What would you say?
I got two. One, we didn't even mention this at the beginning, but a retrospective pro here is in that settlement, there is $2.8 billion that is going to get settled to or handed out to
I didn't even mention
athletes,
that.
I think from 2016 to 2022.
Right. Yeah.
So former college athletes just missed out on NIL. They will reap a nice sum of cash. I have no idea how that works, if everyone just gets the same check or what, but
It has to be split
that's
up
a pro.
evenly depending on the number of players. Like I would imagine if it was one person, that person would get 2.8 billion. But
That would be
I'm
awesome.
assuming it's like 20,000 players. I can look into that real quick.
Yeah, but that's a good pro. But another one I think too is the NIL discourse on social media. I think has gotten way out of hand. People making up numbers for contracts and offers and all of that. So it's nice to have at least some like, hey, 20% of your two. Like I'm looking at this is the most revenue generated in the year 2024. Ohio State had 280 million. That was the most in the country. So it'll be nice. You kind of actually know what they're going to be going into, and I think it evens the playing field a little bit, and I think it helps kids. I think it's better for the athletes when they have four offers that are all within the same $200,000 of NIL. I think it helps them say, the money's not that much different. Let me make the decision best for me, versus kids kind of getting, I don't like the word coerced necessarily, but I think when you might have a better option offering you 700K currently, but there's an offer for 2 million, but it's just not what's best for you. A lot of kids are making that $2 million decision, and I think
Which you and I
that's
both
also why
would
you've
too.
seen such an
Like in
yes, yeah,
general,
yeah,
like
yeah.
I'm not faulting. We're not faulting them for making
Yeah, we're not
decisions.
faulting them. And I think that's why you've seen the portal be so crazy. I think, kids get into a situation that paid a lot of money, and then they sit there after a year and think, "Wait, what? This was not, this is not what I was promised. This is not the situation I wanted to be in. I don't want to be lost in this depth chart." And then they leave. So I think this will help calm the storm of panicking, making decisions. I think the flip flopping with commitments will slow down now. I think the transfer portal will slow down a little bit. So I do think this is a step in mitigating some of that chaos. I am fearful of, like, when you look at revenue, Ohio State generated $280 million of revenue. Use the University of Oregon, for example, only 150. That's almost half the amount of money Ohio State made last year. That's going to be hard. That means Ohio State has double the money to go toe to toe with like a University of Oregon. And University of Oregon's, that's not a small school or anything, but that part is, I think you have a couple like Texas A&M, and Ohio State are way above everybody in terms of revenue. There's a chunk of teams kind of in that like 200 mil to 150 mil. Think of like your Georgias, your Michigans, your Notre Dames, your Tennessees, Oklahomas, Oregons, that kind of stuff. But that top tier is going to be well ahead of everybody financially. It'll be interesting if you're in Ohio State, a Texas A&M. Do you dump that money into football and say we're going to win 7 national championships in the next 10 years? Or do you say, hey, because well, all three of those schools are good at many sports. Do you say, hey, let's just try and continue to be a powerhouse in these 15 sports that we have been? So it'll be interesting to see what they do. Those programs also in a good way will probably be able to keep a lot of those non-revenue generating sports because of just how much money they make in general. So I think that's a good sign. I think a lot of these big schools are not going to have problems funding those still, but it does mean your University of California is probably going to have to cut 15 teams because that $100 million generated just isn't enough to fund more than 4 or 5 programs.
I
So
don't
that'll be an unfortunate scenario.
I don't think anyone's crying poor for Oregon, regardless. Um, and
No, no, no. I'm just saying that shows how much money the
yeah,
top end, like 280 million is a lot of revenue when you think a school not far behind them in terms of athletics is $130 million
yeah.
less in revenue.
Oh no, I completely agree. I wonder 2 points. I wonder if they have a limit on the 22%. Like at some point,
There should be, I would imagine.
I still haven't been able to find it on some articles, but at least what I've been reading is on average is 20.5 million. And I think the reason I said no one's crying poor for Oregon is this doesn't hurt a school like University of Oregon or Georgia or Ohio State or Texas or whoever, like one of the Alabama, like the big boys in college football. What this essentially is a detriment to is pick your Mountain West program here, pick your Group of Five program there. That like part of their revenue comes with trying to make a couple million on losing to a Power Four, Power Five program week 1, week 2, and then part of their revenue is hoping they're good enough to get some fans to fill out their stadium, and essentially the programs around the country that aren't making the $100 million revenue wise. How
Mhm.
are they going to even be able to compete? And I guess the conversation is, should they? And I know that's a
That's the question.
I know that's a harsh reality, and we're gonna get some hate for this. But a lot of people have talked about this. There's been a couple prominent podcasters talking about this in the past, where traditional college football, you want everyone involved. But at the same time, if you tell me that the University of Alabama plays the same sport as the University of South Alabama, then our conversation is not worth to even have. We don't need to have that conversation. So
Yeah.
the fact that there's 120 FBS programs competing for the same national title, it's ridiculous. The teams in the bottom 70 aren't going to compete for that. The teams in the
I
top
would argue even
bottom,
more now,
yeah,
right?
maybe the teams in the bottom like 100 aren't going to compete for that. Maybe there's 20 teams that could compete for playoff spots, and maybe 6 or 7 that can compete for the national title. So I say all that to
Yeah.
say,
I mean,
go ahead.
I was gonna say, think about if you're a Wisconsin, you could probably spend, let's say you could spend $10 million on a 7-5, 8-4 roster, enough to sell your stadium, give yourself enough hype, get on TV enough, sell jerseys. Is it worth spending the extra 10 million to try and compete? Because if you spend the extra 10 million and you still end up 9-3, 10-2, and you're not competing for a national championship, you arguably wasted $10 million generating the same amount of revenue you would have at 8-4. I think you're going to have a lot of programs on that level that are going to sit down and have the serious conversation of, do we just need to be good enough? Do we really need to spend the extra money to be elite? Why not just be good enough in this sport and this sport? And then maybe if you're Wisconsin, you really care about hockey, men's and women's hockey, maybe you say, let's just be good enough in men's basketball, women's basketball, and football. And then let's just go win national championships in these 2 or 3 niche sports and have fun with that. So
Right.
you might see a lot of teams back out of being, I'm not saying they're tanking, but you might see a lot of programs stop trying to be elite, which would be sad. But I think they're gonna have to look and say, like, is it realistic for us to even get big on the national stage?
Right. I think this is a conversation that we'll have in a second, but about because now we're getting close to diving into, are we going to have super leagues? Are we going to have a group of 5 playoff on their own? So and stick with the NCAA. So we'll have that conversation in a second. I just want to stay focused here real quick. Recruiting wise, one of the biggest benefits of this is people think in general it brings back traditional recruiting in some shape or form. Obviously there is payments, but not only will there be less transfers because these kids are going to be jumping into contracts contracts with their programs. I don't know what happened there. But like the recruits will be jumping into contracts with their programs, and some of those contracts will be longer than a year. So while they could still transfer, essentially though that will allow them to in some way, shape, or form, maybe escalate the amount of money they're making from their current school. Like if you pick your favorite offensive line recruit here, you come to University of California, you come to UCLA, we'll pay you $100,000 year one, we'll pay you 150 or 250 year two if you're here. If you're here year 3, you'll make 450. If you're here year 4, you'll make 650. I'm just spitballing numbers. But that's a way to retain players, because the alternative at that point is after year 2, he's just finished making 250. If he's like, man, UCLA is not for me, and he wants to go transfer something somewhere else, theoretically that money could be back to 100. So just incentivizing kids to stay at their programs. And I've said that whole take on this show before. My question in general is, like, recruiting wise, how does this impact recruiting in your eyes? How does this not set up for some super teams? Like, let's say the University of Texas or Ohio State. If what we think is their financial capabilities are as strong as possible, and there theoretically won't be a lot of walk-ons, and scholarship limits will be boosted from 80 to 85 to 105, can't they realistically go out and pay for the most loaded 105 players rosters as possible and just become college football super team? No one has a chance to touch them. Or do you think in general this even levels the playing field a little bit more recruiting wise, brings back the fun of recruiting? Cole, hi, we got a text this week about why don't we talk recruiting? We will. It's just like not very interesting. A lot of people out there listening for college football, it's just like, it's a very interesting for diehards, but the love of someone choosing my school because of my school rather than the paycheck that they got from my school, that excitement's gone, you know? So what do you in terms of recruiting, how would it impact it for you?
I think it doesn't obviously go back to what it used to be, but I think it is a step in the right direction. So I did search this. It does look like you can use up to 22% of your revenue as a athletic department, but up to a salary cap of 20.5 million. So if you're making 50 million with that
That's great to hear.
22%, you can only put 20. Yeah. So I think that's a huge win with recruiting. I think it makes the decisions for kids less about how much money am I going to make at this place and what's the right fit for me, which is what we want kids to have to weigh. Like when someone offers you quadruple the pay, like you have to consider that. And we don't want money to be the deciding factor for people. But at least I think it kind of ruins some of the fun of athletics. So I think it does reinforce, it goes back to which coach is going to develop me the best? Which program do I want to, create a legacy at, or offers me that? Which program can I get to the NFL quickest with? Which athletic facilities do I like the most? So I think it helps bring back some of that normality. And I think a lot of it will depend on, like I mentioned a minute ago, if the Wisconsins, the Pitts of the world, if they're comfortable being okay, then they might take recruiting is probably not going to go super well for them. They're just going to recruit the local kids that fit the bill for them to go 7-5, 8-4. But I do think it opens the door for, if you want to give football a shot and maybe you have a window year, you could go in kind of heavy on recruiting and be able to compete with a Texas or an Ohio State or Miami, some of those bigger programs that beforehand, not only could they probably offer more as a player, but also they had a little bit more in the bag to offer as well. You're just never going to beat those teams for those kids. Now you might have a chance. Maybe you want to. In the short term, this is something I was thinking about as well. This will impact the class of 2026 current commits, which is another reason I know why we didn't talk much about recruiting in the show is because of how much it changes at this point in time. Like a kid committed today means little to nothing versus what's going to happen in December. This will change it a lot too. We don't know like there was no regulations on what kids were offered for class of 2026, class of 2027. Do they look at this and say, well, I'm looking at the 28 other commits at this school right now, and I know we all got promised over 2 million. They obviously can't afford that. What am I going to do? So I do think this is going to create some 2026 hysteria, and you're probably going to see a lot of recruits, rightfully so, kind of freak out. You're probably going to see a lot of decommitments. You're probably going to see a lot of quick commitments trying to like cash in on maybe a bag that they could grab. You're going to see some chaos in the class of 2026. So it'll be interesting to follow, especially if you're a diehard fan. But if you're someone who doesn't want to follow recruiting much until the finish line, wait until December because I think it's going to be chaos for the next 4 or 5 months while athletes try and figure out what this means. High school athletes try to figure out what this means for their future.
In general, what you said about how college kids can recruits can now just go back to, is this coach going to put me in the right position to succeed? Is this, or do I like the facilities? Do I like the uniforms? One of the underlying fabrics of why college football is so great, and I love the NFL, and I know you love the NFL. I don't know where your ties are comparatively, but I love college football more. Part of it is because I have a part of my identity is being a fan, going to games for 4 years, and becoming myself essentially as becoming a young adult at the university that we went to. And
Hmm.
for me, the one part of the fabric of college football and one of the reasons recruiting was so fun, even up until 2 years ago, to follow, was, man, I'm going up in a recruiting battle. It's me and my biggest rival. Well, I hate everything about them. Of course, that kid's got to choose us, and then when he doesn't choose us, he chooses them. Then then a bunch of fans on Twitter and online start trashing the kid, and a bunch of fans from their program start celebrating the kid, and then all of a sudden the kid flips to us, and both fan bases are caught in like a, well, we trashed him, but now we have to celebrate him. We celebrate, yeah, exactly. It's the Spider-Man meme. Part of the fabric is like the kid chooses your school to be a Trojan, to be a Duck, to be a Bruin, to be, I know I'm only labeling West Coast teams, to be a Dog, to be a Buckeye. Part of the fabric of college sports is the pride that some 5-star wide receiver, 4-star offensive lineman saw what you saw in your school, even though you went into it for mostly academics. Like it,
Hmm.
and
It,
good.
no, I was gonna say there's a sense of pride
Yeah.
when a kid picks your school because they want to be at your school. And I think the last 2 years, every program in the country has had a mix of kids who still go to your school because they want to be there. But I think everyone also knows that all of us have had some commits that felt like, they're kind of picking me, I feel like, for some
For the
money.
money. Yeah.
And it shows because usually they transfer, decommit, or and it's a little annoying, but it'll be fun again. There's a pride of like these 20 kids this year, they want to be a Trojan. They want to be an Auburn Tiger. They want to be
Yeah.
a Gator, and that there's a sense of pride of that. That's what made recruiting fun when we were younger, and I think that's what a lot of people have missed the last 2 3 years. And I hope that this is a step to kind of bring that back. And I think it is. It mathematically works
For
out
the
that way.
dual college football NFL fans, part of the pride is waiting till Sunday night football and seeing what school your player your one of your alumni decides to say, and like, or like, even with transfers, seeing like, oh, I bet he's gonna say my school. I bet he's gonna say, even though he's been on 2 or 3 different schools. That's just part of the pride of it. So, long story short, recruiting will be just more traditional, not traditional in in its original form because we're never going back there. The toothpaste is out of the tube, as we've said multiple times.
Yeah.
But in terms of evening up the playing field, there's not going to be, if there are two, there will be $2 million offers. There will be $3 million offers that
Yeah.
we know reportedly, like Jackson Campbell, the number one recruit in the country, got from Miami a couple weeks ago. With that said, everyone has a cap they have to play under. Everyone has to deal with the financial limitations of putting together the roster in their best way. And that includes their current guys. That includes transfers. And we don't even know what's going to
Hmm.
happen to the transfer portal. We've seen a very vocal contingent of coaches in the last couple of weeks come out and say we need only one portal, get rid of the spring portal. I don't know what team I have if you let kids just transfer out after I play my spring game. So there's a lot of aspects here that could be really beneficial for college football. Could bring back parts of the fabrics of that makes people love the sport in general. I also think the first couple years might be a little rocky, but
Yeah.
one of the hardest parts of one of the reasons I think baseball fell off a little bit, they're coming back now, but baseball fell off a little bit was started getting a little too confusing. There were a bunch of rules. There were a bunch of
Yeah.
like, and I think if as a diehard fan you had to explain this to any coworker, any friend who's just a casual fan who will watch Saturday college football but won't follow college football, you're going to confuse them even more trying to explain everything. So at least for
Yeah.
now, we have a foundation to settle everything again. Moving to, unless you have more on recruiting, moving to roster caps. So the 105 roster cap limit. Prior to this, every college football program had 85 scholarship limit. And from there, every program also had about 20 to 40 more walk-ons, depending on how many kids they could not support through a scholarship, but somewhat like have part of the team support gear-wise, support financially. With that being killed, essentially, because if you look at a college football program, and I'm going to bring up the NFL again, if you look at a college football sideline versus an NFL sideline, uh, go watch any
Yeah. NFL is
game.
a 53-man roster.
Yeah, NFL's 53-man roster. Go watch any college football game. Go watch LSU Alabama. Go watch Auburn Alabama, and watch the home sideline. There's like 150 people on the sideline, and
Yeah.
and part of that is because there's rules for how many you can have on your sideline at home games versus away games. You can only travel so many, so you're going to travel your main 85 plus a couple walk-ons maybe. But on your home side, you're going to have everyone there, and everyone's going to be part of your program. And I personally don't like. There's people who say the walk-ons being killed from college football is. Sorry, my dog is walking around.
Producer.
Yeah. Hey, producer Harper, come here. Anyways, some people like hate the walk-ons being killed about college football. What do you have to say about that while I go wrangle my dog?
Yeah. That the walk-on aspect is interesting, especially the movement from 85 scholarships on the college football side to 105 is kind of an interesting move because I don't think anyone will utilize that. When you look at the grand scheme of like this bill, right? If you can only spend 20.5 million, let's assume you can afford the max. Why would you want to thin it out on players that probably won't play for you? You know that those last 20 new scholarships, I don't really see how that benefit. It's not like those 20 kids are going to be the difference between a national championship and a first round playoff exit. The realistic scenario is those kids will probably never play, and they probably are just like walk on caliber type kids. But I don't think schools will even utilize this, which is why it was kind of an interesting pull forward. I don't think it's worthwhile. Also, when you factor in Title IX, you do have to have, there are a lot of rules about with genders in sports and how you have to fit X amount of scholarships if you have for males, you have to have those open for females and vice versa. And college football just being the largest like physical sport in terms of players, number of players, I guess size too, probably. but number of players. I don't know why you would move to 105 football scholarships. Now you're thinning out that NIL cap that you have, and now you're extending. If you bring 20 more scholarship football players, that means you're going to have to probably open up. You're either going to have to get rid of another men's program, or you're going to have to open up a new women's program to meet those 20 kids. So I don't think that that would be advantageous, and I don't see a scenario where many schools do that. Maybe like a Texas, just because I'm sure like schools like Texas are going to have 20 kids that are solid players from the state of Texas whose like only dream is to play at Texas. So they're going to be willing to probably get short shaft on NIL if that means they can wear the Longhorn jersey. But most schools aren't going to be in that kind of scenario, and I don't think most schools are going to have the funds to, yeah, let's just take 20, kids who aren't going to impact our program in any positive or negative way, and then figure that out what that means Title IX wise. It was a weird move. It doesn't seem like it was a weird contingency that I don't think anybody really like. It's not negative, but I don't think it's positive. It just felt like a
I
weird situation.
before the updated NIL rules came out, and with the salary cap essentially, and that's what I'm going to call it. It's revenue sharing. I get it. It's the salary cap for your athletic department.
Yeah.
Before that became a thing, I thought the 105 roster bonus would only benefit teams like Texas, Ohio State, Oregon, Texas A&M, USC, Alabama, Georgia, like the programs that who have boosters who will pay whatever. And the reason I say that is because let's say you even have 80 scholarships. If you have the untethered NIL setup that we had 2 days ago, theoretically, you could go to any 4-star kid in the country and be like, we don't have a scholarship for you, but we have the money for that your scholarship's worth, plus another 300 grand. Like, we will pay through the roof to make sure we can fill 105 scholarship spots, and every one of those spots is a high 3-star, low 4-star to back up our starters. And a bunch of those kids probably wouldn't choose to go that route just because they want to play, obviously, rightfully so. But I just thought this was, if you were only going to do this without tethering NIL in a revenue sharing salary cap world, you would just create more super teams. And it would take away the best of the best from the mid-level teams. Like think about
Hmm.
a 3-star offensive lineman that goes and develops in Minnesota. Theoretically, at that point, Georgia could look at them and be like, "Hey, we need you to be our third string for 2 years. We'll pay you 250 grand, but we just want to be deep. Just making sure we're ready for injuries. We're ready for everything." But you're right. It is weird. None of that. I went on a long tangent there just to talk about things that aren't going to happen because there's NIL is somewhat tethered now. It's not
Yeah.
beautiful, but it's somewhat tethered, and we're going to enter a world where schools will really have to decide what they value scholarship wise. You're absolutely right about the scholarship limits. Title IX becomes a huge factor here. What I wonder in general is how much are schools willing to pay fines or NCAA issues just so they can make sure their football teams programs take suspensions, take athletic department penalties, violations, whatever they want to call it, to make sure their football programs as stocked up as it can be. I don't expect a lot of programs to use up the 105. But what I do almost
Yeah.
expect is if you have money left over in your 20.5, you're no longer going after the walk on. You're
Hmm.
going after the next best offensive lineman, defensive lineman. You're going after the next best kid to come in, hopefully settle, hopefully add depth to your program, develop, and maybe one day become a scholarship player if you have the opportunity for him to, if you have the space for him. It's a little weird. You're right. I think it's just a change that was going to happen regardless. The unfortunate part, and I mentioned at the beginning, and we talked about it, is that if you liked your traditional walk-on stories where like this kid came in as a walk-on, the Sets and Bennett's of the world, probably not going to
Yeah.
happen anymore. Those kids aren't going
No,
to
definitely
wind up
not.
at Georgia. Those kids aren't going to wind up at bigger programs. They can transfer in if they go to a smaller school, play well, and then get transferred to Power 5 programs. But we're going to lose the walk-on story, which
Agreed.
in essence is a little disappointing, but I would also argue how many of those are like without trying to be insensitive. There's not a lot of them out there. People just remember
No,
the
there's very few,
yeah.
very few.
People just remember the best stuff. So we've gone over the revenue sharing cap. We've gone over roster caps. Gone over recruiting. I promised you I would bring it back to this, and in I guess my question: Super leagues. Are we
Mm.
closer today to the SEC, the Big Ten, eventually poaching some programs? I have to mention, without us saying anything, part of the settlement was recognizing the Pac-12 as a Power 5 program. So we're not P4. We have a Power 5 conference in the Pac-12. Part of the settlement also set all 5 power programs, the Big 12, the Big 10, the SEC, the ACC, and the Pac-12 all together for years to come. So theoretically, this is our governing body. I guess.
Yeah, I think with conference realignment and movement of teams, I think this actually slows down super leagues a little bit because the draw of a super league is I can make so much more money that can then turn into a collective and boosters and NIL and all of that kind of stuff, and I can compete that way. Now that there's a salary cap, if you're a Clemson, they're gonna make enough money in the ACC that salary cap they're gonna hit the 20.5 million, whether they're in the ACC or the SEC. They're gonna have the same amount of NIL spend as they would in either scenario, and they're gonna have the same NIL spend that the top end SEC teams are gonna have. So if you're Clemson, it's no longer, oh, I should move to the SEC. I'm going to be automatically richer, and that's going to feed down to me being better at sports. Sure, you still might make more money in the SEC as a whole, but it doesn't necessarily translate into you being better at sports because you can't actually turn around and feed that into your rosters or your scholarships and things of that nature. And I think there's the comfort for a Clemson of being in the ACC now that's been recognized on that level where it's like, I know I can finish top 3 in this league year in, year out. I'm never really going to be worse than that. You go to the SEC, you could not make the playoff 4 years straight and kind of falter down. But I think it slows it down just because that money gained from joining a super league can no longer go into the betterment of your roster and more scholarships. So because of that, I think those big programs are probably not going to mind sticking it out in the ACC and finishing first or second every year and getting a comfortable playoff spot. So I think it halts it a little bit. There's still obviously attractive reasons to jump to a super league, and these super leagues are going to fight. The Big Ten and the SEC are going to fight hard to become super leagues. They're going to fight hard to make it everything better for themselves and for it to be advantageous to join those two. But I do think this slows that down a little bit.
I agree. In general, the what you said is absolutely right. We're probably slowing down, but this is a conversation for another day. We haven't talked about the college football playoff, the auto bids, all the stuff that is making some of these power programs feel like they have leverage over the others. That, in essence, is going to cause some drama and vitriol. But the fact that the settlement recognized all the conferences all together as your Power 5 conferences, that's a big deal. And I don't want that to go without notice. I guess the last point on this, actually, before I get to that, I only mentioned super teams because we talked about what's the point. All due respect to a Nevada having a shot at the national title, or all due respect to North Texas having a shot because they're going to play. Their athletic department plays in a different ballpark than the University of Texas. Um, UNLV plays in a different ballpark, not like figuratively, but like financially, talent acquisition, what they can pay everyone, the size of the coaching staff, size of their athletic departments. One of the downsides to the college football expansion was many people argued we don't need this to become more inclusive. We don't need college football. One of the beauties of it is the fact that it's so every loss is so heart wrenching because you want to win every game
Hmm.
because that is how you get to the playoff or the national title. That is how you become the best of the best. And if we give more teams opportunities at 9-3 or 8-4, even hopefully not 10-2 to make the playoff and compete for a natty, I don't want to. I don't want this to go unseen. Ohio State was the best team in the country this year. Ohio State was an incredible football team, but every other year than last year's college football playoff, they wouldn't have been in the playoff. Not
Hmm.
national champions. They wouldn't have been in the playoff because of who they are.
Yeah.
So there, the aspect of revenue sharing where a lot of teams won't be able to compete, unfortunately, it's going to naturally create like a collective super league, even without deciding it being a super league. All that said, we've covered pretty much every basis of this. What? Give me like a minute, 2 minutes. What is your overall review of this settlement
Overall
passing?
review, it's a step in the right direction. I'm happy this happened. It'll be there's a lot of, I think, chaos that could ensue with recruiting, especially like the class of 2026. So that'll be very fascinating to follow. It'll also be interesting. You look at contracts like Bryce Underwood. He was locked in 4 years, 10.5 million. That's 10% of Michigan's NIL budget is now Bryce Underwood as a solo player. So it'll be interesting. Are they going to restructure that?
I
Is he going to
wonder
try to
if
figure that out?
I wonder if past NIL deals are grandparented into the old laws,
That
like
that's what I'm curious about. What will go down?
which at that point makes if you signed a massive NIL deal last year or 2 years ago, you better win the national title in the next 4 years because that guy's not counting against your cap. I don't know. I've tried to find that answer. It's not that we haven't done research. I don't know all the. I haven't read the actual settlement.
Mhm. But yes, overall, I think it's positive. I think it's good. The last thing I'll touch on is I mentioned earlier that the Wisconsin of the world might just say, I just want to be good enough. I want to make my money and be done. But on the flip side, I hope we see a lot of those also level team, the Wisconsins, the Minnesotas. I hope that something in them is like, I think recruiting is going to be a little bit easier now because the money's a little bit as an even playing field. And I can promise this high end 4 star a starting job day one, whereas Georgia's offering him a third string spot day one. I hope that some of these middle level programs go all in. It would be fun to see some parity in that regard. And this does open the door. It would be a pretty risky move, but it would be fun. So I hope that someone tries that out.
Yeah, that is the goal of this in general is to not have a collective of 5 to 6 teams at the top and then everyone else. It's you can have
Mhm.
several teams at the top, but everyone else is still fighting, shooting for the best. And without getting into another long tangent, that's what the TV deals kind of inspired the major conferences to do. The Big Ten and the SEC got the big deals, and there was a
Mhm.
unwritten expectation within those program conferences that like good isn't good enough anymore. We want every game to be big. One of the reasons a lot of programs, a lot of people got upset about Fox having Big Noon Kickoff Ohio State every game for like 6 straight weeks last year was because unfortunately, if you look at the Big Ten as a whole, and we can have a 30-minute conversation about the Big Ten as a whole, we did over the phone last week. There's not a lot of good games,
Yeah, there's not.
and that in general is not the TV partner's fault for putting the best game on or the most notable team on, but if you have programs like Wisconsin, if you have programs like Mizzou, if you have programs who are good but not good enough yet, really go all in, is be inspired by this change and have difference makers within the athletic department, their GM, their head coach, and be all in on making the changes to compete with the big boys. That can be huge for the sport. That can another thing we're not going to talk about a ton right now, but people are scared of college football becoming the NBA, where the playoff is the only thing that matters. And I'll argue like the playoff will give you a lot of really great games, but October 7th matters too to me. I don't know if that's a Saturday this year or not. October 12th last year mattered to me. You know, like that, those games
Yeah.
that week, as a diehard college football fan, I wasn't thinking about December 24th or whatever, whenever the college football playoff was played. I was thinking about October 12th and how it would, that week had 5 top tier games, how that would impact the playoff race, how that would impact each of those teams' seasons and whatnot. So my review, good for the sport, has some unfortunate side effects, but it was almost needed at this point.
Yeah.
Taking a quick pivot before we get to program report, unless you have anything else to say on the House settlement. It was a good hour
No,
on
all
that, by
set.
the way. But let's talk about. I want to talk about one of the biggest news of the last week, real quick, and then we'll get into our third edition of the program report. Then call it a day. Oregon wide receiver Evan Stewart was projected to be their number 1 wide receiver this year. Reports came out Thursday afternoon from a Twitter account, but it was pretty unconfirmed. We didn't see it from the major college football reporters, but that Evan Stewart suffered a potentially season-ending knee surgery, a torn patella, I believe, and I read that his recovery could be anywhere from 3 months to 12 months. 3 months could potentially get him back during the season. 12 months, he's out for the year. At that point, how big of a blow is this for you, for Oregon's season, for Oregon's offense? You feel bad for the kid, of course. I will have to sit and
Yeah.
point one thing out. I was curious how this impacted the odds on Oregon. And their win total before the injury news was 10.5, and their win total is still 10.5. So I don't know if the sports books are just slow to react, or if in general they're saying the team as a whole is still gonna overcome this major injury. Like, this isn't a small injury. This is their number 1 receiver heading into this year.
Yeah, I actually don't think it's gonna be too problematic for them as an offense. First of all, obviously terrible that this happened in general. You feel terrible for the kid. This is a kid who was a 5-star out of high school, never really found his footing at Texas A&M, came to Oregon last year with high expectations. Wasn't bad per se, but he definitely did not produce, I think, the level that people expected him to. He would show up for 1 or 2 big games, but then he would disappear for a handful. That there was rumors of injuries as well, but coming into this season, he was expected, like you said, expected to be the wide receiver number 1. But also, I know that there's a lot of hype around DeCorian Moore and some other of the big names in the Oregon receiving core. And even in that spring game, Evan Stewart, there was rumors that he might have been hurt and didn't play. And there were some other kids that really showed out in that spring game for Oregon as well. They have a ton of talent outside of him. Everyone on that depth chart is like, you have Justice Lowe, Gary Bryant, Malik Benson, DeCorian Moore, Dylan Gresham, Jack Wrestler, Kyler Casper, Cooper Perry, all 4 stars. Or sorry, DeCorian Moore, 5-star. You have Jurion Dickey, 5-star. Jeremiah McClellan, 5-star. They're going to have like 10 high-end 4 stars or better wide receivers to call on and say, we need one of you to step up. The odds are they get that. They also are going to have one of the better O-lines in the country. They're going to have one of the better quarterbacks in the country. They're going to be able to run the ball. They have 4 very talented running backs. They have 2 of the best tight ends in the country in Kenyon Sadiq and Jamari Johnson. it hurts, but also it happened in June. You have the rest of June, all of July, basically all of August to figure out who's going to fill that role and how that impacts your offense. If this happens the week before the Penn State game, that hurts. That's a game plan you're throwing away and you have 3 days to fix. But when it happens months before the season, I think it gives you enough time to fall back on, okay, like I said, they have a lot of talent. So it's one of you guys needs to step up into this role. That was originally going to be the Evan Stewart role. I think they've got the talent that someone will. And I think they have enough talent on the team as a whole that they'll be all right. Like even without that, they should win most of the games just with the talent that they have in general.
Where it worries me is you're right. There's a ton of talent there, but there's no one proven. And
He wasn't really proven either, though. It's
no,
like,
he wasn't. But I would argue that going into 2 years ago, there was a big moment in the Texas Tech game for Oregon that they needed a catch. Troy Franklin caught it. You knew
mhm.
who it was going to. It was gonna. The defense knew who it was going to. The offense obviously was going to scheme up to Troy Franklin. Troy Franklin caught it. Bo Nix made the pass. Last year, in the biggest moment against Wisconsin, Dylan Gabriel rolls out. He finds Terrence Ferguson, unbelievable catch, but he was
Mhm.
one of the stalwarts there. So I'm not saying that it's Oregon's done for at all, because Evan Stewart, I mentioned this over our text, he's been an enigma. He's been a
Yeah.
mystery. He's so talented. We saw how good he was in the Ohio State game against Oregon, the first matchup last year, and then he didn't play in the Big Ten title game. Reports where he was sick. He was held out, I believe, in the Rose Bowl. There's been it's been like, oh, he has all this potential, but he's like there. So like it breaks your heart as a football fan, and if you're an Oregon fan, breaks your heart too, because this is a kid that was prime to make a name for himself this year. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, he will either have to go into the draft next year without any production for his last year coming off a knee injury, or hope that he can get a medical red shirt, or hope he chooses to come back the next year and he recovers well. It's just you feel terrible for the kid first, I think. I think you're right though,
Yeah.
and I
That's
think
definitely the biggest thing.
exactly. I think the sports books in general too. I mentioned it. Maybe they're slow to adapt or change their odds in August. I mean in June. But sorry, my dog just jumped. maybe they're slow to change their odds in June with the win totals or with the national championship odds. But I'm looking at it all. Nothing's changed. Everyone's expecting
Yeah.
Oregon still to be Oregon, and mind you, they don't have a tough schedule. They have Ohio. They have Penn State on the road. That's a big game. That's the whiteout at Penn State.
Mhm.
But in terms of their regular season success, I don't expect we would need you and I would expect we that Malik Benson, the Florida State transfer, Gary Bryant, Jurion Dickey needs to step up. You said he's a former 5-star. He's been injured and he's been in and out. I trust
Mhm.
there's plenty of talent there, but it's just he hasn't shown it yet. And Jeremiah McClellan, he has a bunch of potential. He was a flip from Ohio State, I think, on signing day. There's
Mhm.
a lot of good talent there, like you said, but you just have to show
Yeah.
show us. And Decorian Moore, I can't. Decorian Moore is obviously the name there to watch, and a lot of people
Yeah.
are expecting a Ryan Williams, Jeremiah Smith type season from him. I don't know. I'm sure he has that in him. I'm sure he can do that. But at the same time, it would have been a lot easier for him to not have all the guys all the defense focused on Decorian Moore if Evan Stewart was on the other side. Same way with Jeremiah Smith wasn't as heavily guarded because Ohio State had the vaunted wide receiver room. And one last thing, sorry, the point that I makes me not as worried about this is Oregon's offense isn't predicated on the pass or the run game. It's predicated on a balance. And like you said, they
Yeah.
brought in two highly touted offensive linemen. They have a good interior offensive line to come back. I'm curious at how it's all going to gel. We saw early on last year, it did not gel. It was struggling
Hmm.
with Dylan Gabriel's first couple games. They got the wins, but it was struggling. So I'm curious how that will gel. But they brought in Hughes, the running back from Tulane. They have a good like four talented running backs there. They have plenty of talent in the offense. They have one of the best callers in the country. So can they iron out everything until a wide receiver decides to step up? Absolutely. I'm not that
Yeah.
worried about it.
In the 13 games he played last year, 8 of them he had under 25 receiving yards. They went 13-0 in those 13 games he played. He had under 25 yards in 8 of them. That like
Yep.
he was you could replace, that's very replaceable, and they were fine. His big games, were in big situations. The Boise State game earlier in the year, the Ohio State game, Purdue, he had a big game. Not that they really needed it there. And then Wisconsin, he had 90 yards, and that ended up being a closer game than it should have been. But he's an important player, and he has a lot of talent. But I think he he hasn't produced at a consistent level, and I don't think he's done anything at Oregon that one of these other big name players that are just younger than him can't do. Which is why I think the books haven't changed any of their odds. As a fan, I was obviously gutted for the kid, just kind of wanted to see him prove himself, and you always want to see him succeed. But in terms of what I felt about the program, even when the news initially broke, in full transparency, I was not nervous. I he was one of those, like I said, like he didn't seem to be a big factor when we needed him to be, except for that Ohio State game. And then there was a lot of games we won without a blink, and he was a non-factor. So, like you said, they don't rely on one player or one style, and that's detrimental. They can win in multiple ways, and they have a lot of players who can help them win. So I don't think that it changes much for them in the grand scheme of things. It more so changes the trajectory of the individual, which is always sad.
Yeah. And I don't want to come off as I think Oregon. I'm not poo pooing Oregon's season. Like I just
Hmm.
have to point out the worry there where it's just a little nerve wracking. Um, what people think of like it's without having any established stars or starters there for a team that wants to win a
Yeah.
natty. And by week 4, to be honest, maybe Corey Moore is that guy. Maybe Malik Benson was just in a bad spot, and we know how bad last year was at Florida State. Maybe Justice Lowe, who really showed out last year as the wide receiver 3 or 4 at times, he can come out and stay on the field, continue to develop. He's a difference maker offensively. He's tall, rangy, he's quick. Kyler Casper, one of the first recruits in the Dan Lanning era, he
Yeah. He's like
recruited.
6'6".
Yeah, and he's been always the guy that whether it was Kenny Dillingham as OC or Will Stein, people just thought if he's healthy once he develops, he's going to be your red zone jump ball guy. He just hasn't been healthy enough to develop. And is this the year that he takes that step? Gary Bryant Jr., I don't really know what to expect from him, but if he's on the field, he can make plays. And I think you have to expect, in general, for Oregon to be good, they have Montana State, Oklahoma State, Northwestern start out the season. Not a murderer's row. They can definitely lose those games. Montana State's number 2 in the FCS. And
Yeah, they won the CS National
we
Championship, didn't
saw
they?
how close
Or second
Idaho
place, maybe.
we saw how close Idaho got to Oregon last year, and we saw how close Boise State got to Oregon last year. There's you're rolling out a new quarterback. You need chemistry, so you need to figure out how to gel the run game, the offensive line, and bring up the receiver involvement naturally and organically. But you're right. This happened in June. You have the ability to not only game plan ahead of time for it, but season plan. Plan out your offense for the season. So gutted for the kid in general. A massive loss for Oregon, but that's what happens when you're a program like Oregon. You can recover, and
Yeah.
I you wish he was there. You wish he was on the field, but it's not the end of the world. We've been going for a while. Let's get into our program report. So there's the debut of the program report animation, and then we're gonna have some music going over it. But program report edition 3, we're gonna go over 3 or 4 different coaches and give them all grades, whether it's on coaching performance, recruiting vibes, how the program appears to be trajectory-wise, their hope, and we're going to give you a rating on the hot seat meter too. The hot seat meter is going to be ranked in reverse, 1 through 10. Number 10 means he's probably got the safest seat possible. Number 1, probably the hottest seat possible. The rest of them are going to be straight up 1 through 10 ranking of, if he has a 9.5, his coaching performance is great. If he has a 1, probably terrible. So, Jace, let's start out with the BYU head coach, Kalani Sitake.
All right, one misspeak I had earlier. North Dakota State beat Montana State in the D2 national championship. Should
Hey,
have guessed that.
thanks
All
for
right,
correcting it.
BYU coach Kalani Sitake. Coaching performance, I'll keep it brief. I am at a 7.4. Been there for 9 seasons now. Uh, he's had some great seasons like last year. He's also had some pretty terrible seasons, like 4-win seasons. Hard to gauge, but BYU is a tough school to win at. Just, obviously with recruiting and everything. 7.4, he's done a good job with what he's had, coming off a really good year, but he hasn't been always amazing. He's not going 11-2 every year, which is the knock to the 7.4.
I'm at 7.8. He's been a good coach. Like you said, he's had some clunkers there, but in general, it's been also during the time that they've gone from independent to the Big 12. They're trying to boost their program, and maybe if you look at it as from the standard of like a tier 1 program, yeah, he's been bad. But if you look at it from a standard of a program builder, which is 95% of college football, he's been everything that BYU could have wanted. Obviously, there's been some moments in the last couple of years where shouldn't have lost that game, man. Like, your team's too good, should not have lost that game. And it's really hurt them. We thought BYU was going to be a top 4 seed last year for a long time. And then they lost a couple of inexplicable games. So I have a 7.8 because as a whole, he's been great. Recruiting vibes.
I'm at a 4.6. They're in that high 50s, high 60s range, which kind of to me is like slightly below average for a Power 4 conference. I understand the difficulty. You do have the hurdle of like if a kid commits to your school, it's usually preferred they're Mormon. They don't have to be, but that does limit your pool of like potential recruits you can bring in. It does make the transfer portal a little more difficult for you. But as a whole, they're kind of one of the lesser Power 4, Power 5 recruiting teams. They just don't really have a lot of recruiting power. 4.6, just slightly below average.
Wow, I had a mic issue. I have him at a 5.7. Same thing. They're not recruiting in the tier of winning games. Not winning games, in the tier of like even Arizona State or Texas Tech in their conference. So they need to be top 20, top 25 at that. But 41st, 44th, 58th over the last 3 years. They're mid at best recruiting wise. They get good players. NIL and the Big 12 move has been huge for them in terms of bringing in extra talent. And I think last year, more than any, we saw what that BYU fan base can be if they were good. And that fan base the stadium looked electric. Everyone was there. Everyone was probably sober. And hey, no shot to them, but I've heard college football players say it's so weird. You go into LSU or whatever, everyone's hammered screaming at you. You go to BYU, they're even more menacing because they're sober screaming at you. So they're mid-tier best recruiting wise, but I think they have potential to grow just because of the landscape of college football we're about to enter into. Moving into program trajectory, Jace.
I have them at 6.8, and it's I feel differently about the future for them. I think this new like House bill hurts them. They have been since moving to the Big 12 and since NIL has become free, they have one of the largest NIL collectives, and they have in the country. And you saw with college basketball, I think they just bought like the most expensive roster we've seen since the Duke
$8
team
million
last
dollars for
year.
one guy, I think.
Yeah, and so now with this new settlement, I think that BYU was able to say, "Hey, I know it's a little bit annoying for you to come to our school because you're gonna have to at least practice a religion that you might not be a part of, but we can make it up for it in this massive amount of money." They're not gonna be able to do that anymore. They're gonna kind of have to go back to their old roots, which they've always been a solid team that will have a window here and there. They're really good. I think that's going to have to continue for them. They're still a good program and they still have a lot of hope. So that's why I'm going 6.8, almost in that 7 range. But I think this House bill hurts them a little bit. And I just think like they're a window program. And under Sataki, I think your best case scenario was last year. I
Yeah.
think that is like the best you can do. Maximize all of the talent. You maximized every 3-star you had. But we've seen with him where that happens, and then they all leave, and then they're stuck going 4-8 for 3 or 4 years straight. So 6.8, I have faith in them, but not a whole lot of hope.
I'm a whole point ahead of you. I'm at 7.8. Look at me being more optimistic than you. Um, I didn't think we'd ever get there. I I think the Big 12 is anyone's conference, and
Yeah.
until we have I hate to say blue blood, but until we have someone take control of that conference for 3 4 years, Arizona State could do that. Who knows? But
Hmm.
if BYU is similarly competitive as they were last year, I think in terms of, like I said, we saw how great that fan base, that stadium atmosphere could look like going into the like for opposing fans and whatnot to come in. So for me, it just I'm optimistic about their future, but a lot of that is like they're in the Big 12 and they can win conferences by being really good but not elite. So
Yeah.
for me, that kind of goes into my hot seat meter. I have a hot seat for him at a 9.0. He's safe. We also the downside of a BYU or a USC, they're private schools, so we don't know what their contract situations are looking like. But I remember whenever like major programs are looking for coaches, Kalani Sitake is interviewed, and a lot of times that
Hmm.
just rewards himself with a BYU contract extension. But if you're wanted by other programs, if you're at least considered by other programs, you're safe. And I think BYU recognizes that. He's found a way to make, as you've mentioned, the recruiting obstacles in Provo less of an obstacle and actually be able to compete. So that's kind of where I'm at. Jace, real quick, check your text. So that's I have him at a 9.0 hot seat meter. He's safe. He's not getting fired. Where do you have him?
I'm at 8.5. I don't have much to add beyond what you just said. 8.5 for me. He's safe.
Alrighty. So that totals up Kalani Sitake at a 7.2. We should rank these, but in terms of coaches, he is our fifth highest ranked coach going into 2025, I believe, if I'm looking at that right. Let's move into Minnesota head coach PJ Fleck.
Ooh, it's a fun one. We tied for coaching performance. We both threw down the 7.2. My rationale there was I think he's done more with that program than that program could have hoped for. I think they punch above their weight class. He does a good job. They mostly only get in-state kids, and Minnesota's not like a football powerhouse state. They don't really produce much talent out of there. So he's done a really good job. I thought last year they were way better than I don't even remember what their final record was, but they had that brutal loss to Michigan where they recovered the onside kick and then it got overturned for an offsides call. That was pretty tough. That was in the big house too. They also lost to North Carolina week 1 last year on some tough fumble, iffy call, led to a game-winning field goal for North Carolina in a game that Minnesota, if you were watching that game without a score bug, you would have thought Minnesota was up 40. So they had some tough losses. I thought they were like 1 or 2 really unlucky breaks away from being 9-3, which would have been a phenomenal season. So I think he's done a good job there. 7.2. They haven't hit that big game and that big milestone to go much higher than that, though.
He has 3 9+ win seasons at Minnesota, and that, all due respect, shouldn't be happening. So
Yeah, that is very impressive work.
he's your typical old school, like, physical leaning head coach. Play defense, run the ball. You gotta respect for him. I also love his press conferences, especially how like he was just stood up on the podium at Big Ten Media Days last year and just screamed. I think he was screaming at everybody without realizing he was screaming. He's just the only reason he's not higher than 7.2 for me is he's had the good seasons. I don't think they're not moving up. They're moving laterally.
Yeah.
So that goes into my program hope. But that's where I'm at. Recruiting vibes for you.
5.5 is where I had them. They recruit like in that like back end 30 range, which is probably just above the average for middling Big Ten school. They also, like I mentioned a minute ago, kind of just only recruit in-state kids. So if Minnesota ever has a really good player, that's great. You know, they usually do retain them, but just not a lot of talent, as I mentioned, comes out of that state. So I think maybe with this NIL budget, maybe they can hopefully grab in some of those 4 stars from Wisconsin, maybe get one of those 4 stars from Iowa. Maybe they want to go all in on football. Things go well. We'll see. They punch just above the average weight class for a 5.5, but it's nothing to call home about.
It's really interesting because my recruiting vibes was higher than yours on BYU, and your recruiting vibes are higher than mine on Minnesota. I have them at a 4.3, but it's really interesting because they aren't any different realistically than BYU recruiting. They've had one higher class in the last 3 years, like in the 30s, I believe. But in general, they're nothing to be excited about. I have them at a 4.3 because I think I had BYU higher just because I think they're more attractive. They have
Okay.
as they have like a really exciting stadium atmosphere. Not that Minnesota doesn't. Minnesota absolutely does as well. But I think
They have to go for that, like,
yeah.
there's that you field goals.
For me, I think for some reason BYU is just more sexy, and that's why I had him like for the future of like interesting kids to come play for their program, rather than Minnesota, which is very interesting for in-state kids. But I think you said it; they recruit mostly in-state. I think BYU goes a little bit out. Program trajectory,
Yeah.
go for it.
Program trajectory. I have them at a 6.4. The sixes are tough to rank. They could, if they go in and they really tried, and PJ Fleck is able to get a big name or two, not from the state of Minnesota, they could potentially do some damage. Those are all big ifs. He's a good coach. They recruit decently enough. They'll continue to be 7-5, 9-3, fluctuating. I don't really see a world where they're better than that. I do see a world where they could be worse than that. 6.4. I'm trying to be hopeful for Minnesota. They're consistent. I think you know what you're getting out of Minnesota football. It's not bad football. So 6.4. Tough one to rank. That was a hard one.
That I didn't even mess with the decimals. I put them at a flat 6.0 just because, like I said,
Yeah.
PJ Fleck's done good stuff there. I mean, even looking at their records before PJ Fleck got there, they went 9-4, 6-7, 8-5, 8-5, 6-7, 3-9, 3-9, 6-7, 7-6. So they under PJ Fleck have been a little better than the past, but they have been Minnesota in general the last 20 years. And for
Yeah.
me, unless PJ Fleck goes on this massive recruiting binge and decides to change up some of how he sees how to build a program, I think they're more moving laterally, and that's fine. There's plenty of programs and coaches who make careers out of that, and they are great coaches. But for me, they are stable but not inspiring. They are
Yeah.
moving laterally, not up. Like you said, you explained it better than I could. You could see them. You can't see them going 10+ wins or 11+ wins, other than maybe once in the coming years. But you can definitely see them going 3, 5 or less wins in the coming years, a lot more. So that's where
Yeah.
I'm at. I think it's hard because they're not a bad program, they're not a bad team, so you don't want to give them like a 3, but they're also like not an elite team. They're just middle of the pack, and a 6.0 for
Yeah.
me. Hot seat meter, where do you have them?
I have one last thought on the future hope. I meant to mention him earlier, but I forgot to. Koi Perch, that kid is a demon. He plays safety, can play wide receiver. He was one of the best freshmen in the country last year that didn't get talked about because he's played for Minnesota. But he was a top 100 recruit out of Minnesota, and he really showed out last year as a freshman. And that 2024 class was 33rd in the country. And then their 2026 one is currently 18. Like I said, there's going to be chaos and that'll change. But there's some of the hope. Hot seat meter, I have him at an 8.0. He's safe, not really safe. He's well liked. My fiance is from Minnesota, and her family, a lot of them are Minnesota fans, and they all really like PJ Fleck. He's well liked in Minnesota, so there I thought he was really safe. But as we just both said, they could go 5 and 7 back to back years, and that number will drop fast. So 8.0, he's safe for now, but he's not untouchable.
I'm right there with you. I'm at a 7.5, so I guess I have him at a bit of a hotter seat. For me, he's safe, he's stable, but he's not inspiring, like I said.
Yeah,
And that can change next year. We could have a conversation next year. Man, Minnesota, what a year. PJ Fleck,
yeah.
save a seat.
He's
Or
gone 13-0 before.
yeah,
He did it at Western Michigan. There's no reason he can't do it there.
or we could have a conversation next year. Be like, shoot, this is a make or break year for him. They just went 3-9. Like,
Yes.
I don't necessarily expect any of that to happen. Let me quickly check one thing.
And that 3-9 conversation is more likely than the 13-0 conversation.
Exactly. Um, they their win total for this coming year if is not on FanDuel.
That's
Where is it?
interesting. Let's see. While you search that, let me start getting in to our last coach of the day, coach
Yes.
number 3, Curt Cignetti, the Indiana head coach, entering year 2. He came from James Madison the years prior. First year in Indiana, amazing year. That led the coaching performance for me to be 7.8. Uh, Probably could have gone higher. They had a very easy schedule, but they did blow out all of these teams a little bit lesser than them. But they also got blown out in the games where they were playing teams better than them. I think, and they were blown out too. Make that clear. It was not particularly close. And I think that beating bad teams by a lot means you know what you're doing, you have good players, and you have a good game plan. When you get beat by a lot against teams who are better than you, it usually just the talent's not quite there, the game plan wasn't quite there. Good team, great season. They didn't do anything to make me think, yeah, that was an elite season. So I 7.8, but you could argue higher. I'd be fine with that.
He's been an FBS head coach for 3 years, so it was kind of hard for me to. I based it off of just Indiana, so I put him at an
Mhm.
8.35. Also, I couldn't find Minnesota's win total. What the heck?
It's not be out yet. It's
So
13.
I have Cignetti at an 8.35. What he did last year, flat out incredible. I don't care about the strength of schedule arguments. That's our
That's fair.
argument for once we have the playoff conversation. But
That's fair.
in terms of doing his job and winning games, he did it. And we'll get more into it recruiting wise, but he's been a FBS head coach for 3 years. He went 8-3 at James Madison, 11-1 the next year, and then 11-2 at Indiana. He was at Elon before he won games there. He was at another another smaller program before that, won games there. He's just a good coach. So
Yeah.
this year isn't a make or break in terms of his job security, but it is a point of review for all of us college football fans of like, was last year just lightning in the bottle, or is this something he can sustain? So let's go into
Mhm.
recruiting vibes. What do you have?
I had him at a 6.2, just in the sense that as of now, they haven't. he's brand new. Like it was hard to tell last year just because he brought in like mostly transfers from James Madison. Um, had the 29th overall ranked class going into 2026. Sorry for the 2026 class. 39th last year, 22nd in transfer portal. This will get better, and you'll hear that reflected in my program hope or trajectory. But as of right now, just based on what he's done on paper, 6.2. But I don't think that's reflective of where it will be. That's just what he's done on paper so far.
I think
6.2.
you're right. I have him at a 6.8. Everything you said is correct. Where I only want to add on to it, and maybe that's why I'm zero point 0.6 higher than you, is
Mm.
last year, and it's well documented. He came into Indiana. He had very little scholarship players left, and a lot. They brought in a lot of transfers, and you could go the Dion route and bring in 80 new guys, 60 new guys. What they instead did was they brought in experienced Power Four or FBS Group of Five school players to win right away, and he picked the right guys. So in terms of
Yeah.
recruiting talent and recruiting evaluation, him and his staff did their job as needed. They were very solid there. So it the recruiting class itself is still not built to beat the top dogs. Doesn't matter. Like, I'm sorry, at some point you're gonna have to go up against Ohio State in that conference, or Penn State, or Oregon, or USC with how they're recruiting, and X's and O's can get you so far. What's the line? X's and O's. Give me Jimmy Joe's over X's and O's, and
Yeah.
they can coach up as much as they can. That he could be the best coach ever, X's and O's wise. I'm not saying he is, but at some point you got to recruit, and
Yeah.
I give him a 6.8 to give him credit for how he's recruited so far, and the fact that
Mhm.
they've done more quality over quantity, but you also have to combine some quantity in there too going forward. Program trajectory, I'll kick us off there. I have him at a 7.78. It's the most optimism I've seen in Indiana in a while. So that,
Yeah.
for me, it's kind of what I said earlier. This coming year isn't a make or break year for Curt Cignetti. He's not going to get fired unless he says some crazy things. But it is a point of, can we do that again? Can we win 8+, 9+ games again, or are we still going to be? Or are we going to get relegated back to being middle of the pack in the Big Ten, or lower tier in the Big Ten? So I think there's just cautious optimism in Indiana, but there's, for the first time in a while, there's excitement there. So it's just, what route are they going to go? Are they going to go towards the exciting or the negative?
Mhm. I had him at 8.1, a little bit higher, but similar thought process. My add-on to what you had said will be this is a school that has a lot of money. They make a lot of revenue. I think people don't realize it's one of the more wealthy athletic departments in the country, and they have a lot of wealthy alum and boosters and things of that nature. This new bill, they will be able to maximize that 20.5 million. But I think they're also probably going to want to try and revive their basketball program because this school will always love basketball. So I think that hurts them a little bit, but I really believe in Curt Cignetti. I think that recruiting will get better. I think they're going to be Indiana has a decent amount of football talent, nothing crazy, but it's decent. I think they can monopolize that. There's a lot of talent in Illinois that I think they're going to be able to poach into a little bit. Same with Ohio and Michigan. I think they're going to have enough money to take some of those good players. Not all of them. Obviously, they're not going to beat out the Ohio States for the 5 stars, but those 4 stars that used to go to Michigan State or that would like fill in a depth role at Michigan, you might go to Indiana now and you might have a chance to start. I have hope for them. I think they've got the money. I think they've got the hype. They've got the school. They got the coach. 8.1. I'm with you though. He's an X's and O's guys. He needs to prove to me he can actually beat some of those bigger programs before I go any higher than 8.1.
Yeah, that I'm very high on him. Also, yeah. I have him at 7.78 for a reason. Hot seat meter. Let's just do this quick. This is the longest show already
Nine
we've ever done.
five.
9-5 for you. I have him at a 9-2. He's a toast of Bloomington right now. He's.
Yep.
We'll see how it goes from there on out, but that's where I have him for now. So we've done program report. Let's quickly just go over the rankings. So our average out for Curt Cignetti is 8.03, Kalani Sitake 7.20, and PJ Fleck, we have him at a 6.51. So our current standings, we've done 10 head coaches. Dan Lanning remains number 1 at a 9.48. Mike Elko, number 2, 8.20. Lane Kiffin, number 3, 8.16, followed up by Curt Cignetti at an 8.03. Brian Kelly follows that up as 7.93. Kalani Sitake, 7.20. PJ Fleck, 6.51. Mike Norvell, 5.98. And Justin Wilcox, 3.86. Granted, everyone at home.
That's pretty good.
Yeah, everyone at home. This isn't all the head coaches in the country. We're getting there. But out of our top 10, I think the proof is in the pudding. In terms of program hope for this coming year and coaching, I think we're on the right track there. One last thing before we wrap it up. We got to do our one game. Jace, this week I want to talk to you about, I believe it's week 1, UCLA. Utah at UCLA. Utah is 3.5-point favorites.
Oof.
This
is a tough one.
Where are we leaning on that game? It's really fun. It's Devin Dampier in the New Mexico offense going up against the former co-OC at Indiana, Tino Sinceri, and Nico Iamaleava, the guy who essentially launched our podcast. Where are we leaning?
Oh man, this is a tough one. I'm gonna lean Utah just because it's Kyle Whittingham. It's the Utes. They win big games. That's what they do. This feels like a bigger game. Also, I know it's not the continuity that Utah ran this offense last year, but it's the continuity of the quarterback and the offense coordinator, same system, just new location. And as I've said a million times, early in the season, I really value continuity. Do you understand the offense? Do you have chemistry? They're going to run the ball a lot, which bodes well early in the season. You need to throw the ball, especially later in the year. You want to come back in games. Utah is going to be able to run the ball day one. And that's important early in the season. It's a lot of teams struggle in the passing game early on. If you can run the ball, you can win early. They're set up to do that. I think they're a better coach team. I think they have a little bit more structure set in place. They're going to be able to run the ball a little bit better. UCLA might have a high ceiling later in the season, depending on what happens with Nico, but I think that's a tough draw for him. Not a great roster outside of him. First game against an opponent that knows your school, knows your team. They've played you before. Utah's coming in hot. I think they're going to be angry after a bad year last year. You're going to get, whenever Utah kind of plays this, like, I don't know, I don't know how to explain it, because you also watch Pac-12 football. This feels like a game Utah's going to look amazing. Like, this feels like one of those games Utah's going to come out and score like 55 points, and everyone's like, "Oh no, Utah's back."
They're just going to run
just
it down
has that. You can feel it. Yeah, you can just feel it. Utah's one of those teams. They always have good tight ends. They always have good O-lines. You can kind of just feel like Utah is going to start hot this year, and UCLA is the unfortunate number one opponent for them.
When you're talking about continuity, can we talk about how not only does Utah have more continuity, but UCLA's quarterback, as good as he could be for them, he came in after spring ball. He hasn't practiced.
Yeah, he still hasn't technically taken snaps with them yet.
Yeah. Harper, come on. Sorry. My dog is shaking now. She can sense the show's coming to an end soon. So when we're talking about continuity, there's just a complete lack thereof at UCLA. And I'm excited for how UCLA's season is going to go. Also, I'm looking at their schedule. Utah at UCLA to start. UCLA goes to UNLV week 2. Who allowed that to happen?
That's tough for them.
And then they play New Mexico at home. Then they're back out and they're playing Northwestern on the road, at home against Penn State. They got a tough schedule.
They do have a tough schedule next year.
I expect UCLA to be improved. I'm gonna take Utah with the 3.5. I think, like you said, there's two routes this game could go. It could turn into a route, like you said, Utah comes out, scores 39, UCLA scores 18, Utah easily covers. But I also remember the last couple of years of Utah having not the best offense, and they go up against some opponents that give them a hard time. But because of their coaching, their offensive line, their strong defense, they somehow eke out a 4-point game. Like they somehow win 20-16. They somehow win 23-7. Like it never looks pretty in those type of games for Utah, but because of their talent and their coaching staff, they always figure it out from there. We've made 4 picks so far in our one-game segments. We both picked Iowa State at 3.5 over Kansas State week 1. We've both picked Clemson in the LSU at Clemson game. Clemson's favored by 2.5. We both picked Utah this week. Utah favored by 3.5 over UCLA. And then Alabama at FSU is our only game that we've differed so far. Bama's a 12.5-point favorite. I picked Florida State to cover, not necessarily to win. You picked Bama to cover. I don't know if I'm going to end up changing that pick down the road, but I'm going to settle there for now. We're going to keep track of all of our picks, and we're going to give ourselves an opportunity to change them as the season comes close. Jace, what a podcast. It's been fun.
Long podcast.
I apologize for the length, but I think we needed to do that for the house settlement conversation. What you guys need to do is go follow us on socials. We're on Twitter, F4 Discussion, YouTube flagged for discussion, TikTok flagged the number 4 discussion. We're everywhere you get your podcasts. We're building this thing, and we're at an hour and 46. Last week we were super shocked that we were at an hour 33, and the week after, granted, I think we would have been less if the house settlement deal didn't come through last night. But what a show, what a time. That's all I got. Jace, you got anything else?
No, thank you all for listening. If you made it this far, bless your heart, bless your soul. You're a true fan and a true friend. We're having a lot of fun. It's great. An hour and 40 just shows how much we enjoy talking about this. We will try our best to not keep going an hour 40, but we do love talking college football. So no promises on that front.
Eventually we'll have like a recording software and set up where we can break these up. So you don't have to listen to an hour 40 straight. You can just listen to the house settlement conversation or the program report on its own. But for now, as Jay said, thanks for everyone who tuned in. If you made it this far, shoot us a text. I'm assuming it's going to be our parents and Cole. So we appreciate you guys.
Shout out Cole.
Shout out Cole for sure. Real one. From there on out, my name is Farbod Merkazi. He's Jace Hatfield. This has been Flag for Discussion. Peace.